Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring you the stories of people making life better for others locally, globally, and digitally. We're a part of Rotary International, over 1 million people in tens of thousands of clubs around the world. Rotarians and Rotaractors who ascribe to service above self, the motto of Rotary International. The idea is that with programs like this and meetings not quite like this, we end up with a lot of people inspired to see what they can do to improve their communities, which we think is quite exciting. Today, we're going to hear from Adam Greene. He is in New York. He is an expert on loneliness and has developed a diagnostic tool that is useful in how we begin to think of ways to improve the communities of those who are veterans, I would say, in life. And we're excited to have him talk to us about the work he has done. So, Adam, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you here at the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley.
Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. I always think it's ironic when I give a virtual talk on loneliness. Here we are connected through screens and yet somehow disembodied. I always can't help but wonder how many of us are feeling a bit lonely right now. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. For most of you, I can't see you, and I understand many of you will be joining later on demand. So my name is Adam Greene. I'm the CEO of Klaatch, and I lead a diverse team of data scientists, social connectivity experts, and other professionals, all committed to solving the epidemic of loneliness among older adults. In our hyper-connected digital age, loneliness has emerged as a paradoxical epidemic. We're more connected than ever, yet increasingly feeling isolated. Okay. So let's consider some statistics which you may have heard. For the first time in human history, there are more people over 65 than under 5 globally. With this demographic shift has come a silent epidemic, loneliness. Chronic loneliness worsens health and doubles the risk of dementia diagnoses. And it literally kills, shortening life expectancy by more than 5 years. But here's something less well known, but crucial to solutions. Loneliness changes a person's behavior. So loneliness is an aversive signal from the brain like hunger. Have you ever known someone who's hangry? That's your brain changing your persona to get you to focus on meeting a need we need to live, food. Loneliness is the same kind of signal. It also changes our behavior. But what happens when we don't listen to this signal? Well, chronic loneliness makes us self-protective and distrusting, self-centered, and causes us to lose our ability to empathize. Functional MRI experiments have found that if you show a lonely person another human face, their brains light up as if they're seeing a predator. Unmet, this loneliness caused bad habits creates a cycle that's hard to break unless you understand the specific causes of that person's loneliness and tailor solutions that researchers have said are necessary to solve the epidemic of loneliness. So current measures of loneliness are limited and inadequate, telling us someone is lonely, but offering no insight into why or how to help them. They also give us no idea what are the effective interventions for a particularly lonely older adult, and no way to measure which programs work best with which individuals. This is important because loneliness is complex, and we become lonely for many different reasons, such as losing a spouse or a friend or family member, retiring, or other loss of identity, or other reasons like incontinence or loss of mobility, which again goes to our identity of independence and an ability to care for ourselves. By the way, what is loneliness? Well, loneliness is the difference between your desired level of social connections and the meaningful connections that actually exist in your life. That means if you're an introvert, you just need less connections, an extrovert more, but we all need our desired amount. And if we don't achieve that, then our body responds and generates a visceral reaction that encourages us to seek connection. We've all felt it. Loneliness is uncomfortable. It's our body's normal way of telling us to fulfill a requirement, our biological need for socialization. So the visceral, uncomfortable feeling of loneliness is normal and healthy. The problem is in not responding to it. By the way, being alone doesn't mean you're lonely, and being in a room full of people doesn't mean you feel connected. Just bringing people together doesn't work. The problem is that for many older adults today, they're unable to easily respond. And so the cycle of withdrawal and deeper loneliness continues. Enter the social quotient, which was developed by Klaatch. This isn't just another self-reported loneliness scale. It's the first holistic diagnostic that not only detects the depth of a person's loneliness, but the specific dimensions of that person's loneliness. How does it work? Well, the social quotient uses natural language processing to analyze recorded conversations between residents and staff or by an older adult sharing a story. We analyze their words and voice to reveal complex patterns, or what we call loneliness phenotypes, key to personalizing solutions. Once we know the dimensions of your loneliness, it's easier to match a person to the right program or to investigate the underlying issues more easily. It's like having a high-resolution MRI for loneliness that can be used to dictate solutions. This is important because loneliness is often stigmatized. It's a sense of people not having any friends. But in fact, that's not what causes loneliness. It's this withdrawal that comes from this loss that leads us into this bad cycle. Let me share a story from the Towers in Connecticut, which is a not-for-profit senior living community. When we introduced the social quotient measure, we discovered that over 38% of their residents were lonely, despite a bustling social calendar, a great management team, and a strong focus on community. Everything looked fine, but it wasn't. The problem was large and growing. For example, it turned out only 60 individuals made up 85% of their program attendance. 200 residents went to zero programming. Many individuals who were viewed just as difficult were really just lonely and exhibited those behaviors we discussed. Management was shocked, and ever since, together, we've been developing the Social Quotient platform as a solution. Take George, a retired accountant, always first to volunteer. From the outside, he seemed thriving. But the social quotient revealed a hidden struggle with a loss of professional identity that deepened over time. Later, after seeing his social quotient score, the wellness coordinator in the community spoke to George and learned he felt adrift and he missed the camaraderie of work. Over time, family and friends and the wellness coordinator had noticed his behavior was changing. And while he still participated in community activities, his affect changed. He was surlier, only talking about himself. And while he participated in community activities, he was really not the same person. It was his loneliness persona that had emerged. And paradoxically, that persona pushed people away just when he needed them most. This is a classic sign of loneliness. His loneliness wasn't about a lack of opportunity for social interaction. He had plenty of opportunity, but a lack of personal purpose. A loss of identity is a common reason older adults become lonely, and very different from the loss of a longtime spouse or partner. The social quotient can see the difference. Armed with these insights and an analysis of the community's programs categorized by degree and dimension of loneliness, Klaatch began matching available programs to fit the need and suggesting new ones like a grief group following COVID. In the case of George, the staff put him in charge of the finances for the resident-run community store. It seems small, but as is often the case, small is fine to break the cycle of loneliness. For other residents, they introduced virtual reality travel experiences, or, as I said, a specialized grief group. In some cases, they discovered incontinence or a loss of mobility as the cause of the initial withdrawal and subsequent loneliness. Different causes, different contexts, but all leading to a lonelier individual and community. And remember, more lonely individuals, the more difficult, distrusting, and problematic neighbors. This sort of becomes the hallmark of when a community starts to break down. And what we know is loneliness will spread through a community in the same way a virus will. And there's been lots of studies that have shown over a 5-year period how that loneliness will spread. Today, we have a large database of recorded conversations correlated to other demographic and health data collected by the communities and social service organizations we work with. We've run 25 pilots, and our work has attracted the attention of academic researchers. We've now partnered with the University of Pennsylvania Computer Science Department, Johns Hopkins Gerontology, the University of Texas School of Public Health, and the University of Nebraska, all to validate and expand the potential of this technology. Over the next year, you'll see papers in peer-reviewed journals validating our work. We have pending grant applications in front of the NIH and are building on the amazing foundation of our academic partners who have validated our methods. But this technology is not just about loneliness. Imagine a world where from a single short conversation, we can help providers understand and differentiate accurately a host of behavioral challenges like depression, anxiety, resilience, well-being, and of course, loneliness. It's just like a blood test that screens for 20 different conditions. A single short conversation could do the same, empowering caregivers to better understand those they care for and which solutions work best for them. Recently, we also used our years of experience of interviewing older adults and advances in AI to develop a story bot that uses AI to have a friendly audio bot conduct interviews about a person's life experiences, like a favorite vacation or a biggest life lesson. It turns these interviews into stories that the residents or members of the community can share with family and friends. You know, it can be hard to write your own stories, but we found it's much easier to answer questions about them. In a 5-minute interview, it not only creates a scalable method to generate the raw language we need for our analysis and to do an SQ score and recommendations on programs, but it also provides a meaningful experience for the older adult and a way to pass on their stories. It provides practical information that can aid the stressed and overworked staff in these not-for-profits where turnover averages over 30% nationally, and it's not uncommon to see 100% annual turnover among the staffs in either the senior living communities or the social service provider. By the way, sharing stories is empowering and has been shown to help the lonely become connected. We're always looking for input and advice to help solve the epidemic of loneliness and to identify communities where improving social connection is a priority. And increasingly, nonprofit senior living communities and social service providers need your financial support to test out new technologies and solutions like our StoryBot app. Your involvement can help these communities to refine our tools and expand their impact. Think of it as more coffee clutches and less virtual interactions. Loneliness isn't just an individual problem, it's a societal one. And with the tools like Social Quotient, we can now have a light to guide us through this challenge. I encourage us all to work together, to volunteer, to join as advisors, to crack the code to loneliness and to break the cycle of isolation. Because in the end, we're all in this together. And isn't that the point? Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That is a lot that we're going to have a lot of fun working with right now. I'm excited about the conversation that we're going to have. I'll have you go ahead and stop sharing. We'll bring up the group and I'll introduce who we've got, and then make a move over to our Q&A. So from our club in Houston, Rory Olson, in Walnut Creek, California, Shag Shagrin. I'm Rushton Hurley. I'm in San Jose. Adam's in New York, as I mentioned earlier. And Adam, let's start with this. In terms of the kind of testing that you have used for the Social Quotient tool, can you tell us more about what the subjects in those tests do? How do you do the measurements that have led you to the point where you are?
This is the great thing about the way we do things, we think, because loneliness can often be very stigmatizing. So the conversations are completely friendly conversations. So in the case of a senior living community or a caseworker at a social service provider, they're just having a semi-structured, friendly conversation that is designed to generate as much language from the individual as possible. So in our case, we need a minimum of 300 words. And so what we're able to then do from these conversations is they don't have to be about loneliness. In fact, they never are. How it's just the friendly conversation you're having with your neighbor. Or in the case of using the Storybot app that we've been developing, it's just telling your story about a favorite vacation. But within those words, using the natural language processing technology and other technologies around the valence, tone, and hue of the voice, we can detect a whole series of information, including the specific dimensions and depth of a person's loneliness. By the way, this is true for depression and anxiety, where you can differentiate between loneliness and depression or depression and anxiety using the same kinds of tools.
And are these tools built on the same kinds of technologies that underlie generative AI in terms of being able to take quantities of information and to pick out pieces and relationships among them that allow you to better understand what someone might be dealing with?
So this is based on a very, very deep quantity of research that was done. I wouldn't say it was begun, but it was really formalized by a guy named James Pennybaker out of the University of Texas. And it began with looking at the notes of psychiatrists and psychologists around individuals. And over time, they've built up substantial databases on languages that have then been tied to things like personality using a five-factor personality model or other information. And then a lot of it is around the math that it turns out when you're talking and just having a conversation like we are now, and if we combine that with a validated self-reported instrument, we're able to then correlate the language in a way that lands up being statistically strongly significant and very accurate. And so, yes, in the sense that it's large amounts of data, that is also true for generative AI, but it's a related but not the exact same technology.
Okay. And generally speaking, when you talk about the kinds of tests that you've done, what kind of sample size are we working with? Is it dozens, hundreds, thousands? What?
So we've got a couple thousand conversations that we've done. It's you can think of it, better way to think of it is about a couple of million words of text. An average interview is about 15 minutes. In our current model, if you're using the Storybot, we think it'll be about 6 minutes. So we can collect a lot more language in that kind of conversation. And that's important, as I said, because a lot of these communities have very stressed staffs and they have a lot of, it's not uncommon to see a caseload of 80 or 90 people on their book. So it's hard for them. By the way, they don't have these conversations all the time. They have them 2, 3 times a year, right? Check-in calls is the way we think of them. So I guess does that answer your question in terms of sort of the amount
It
of data? It's
it
enough
does.
that it's statistically significant what we've been able to do. And the work that we're doing with the universities will expand that substantially.
Nice. So several questions that have come in via the chat and on my list as well. One has to do with kind of a basic question that's kind of near to the heart of a lot of people, and that has to do with the role of pets. And is that something that factors into the work you do in some way?
It can factor in because it can be a solution, right? So there actually is evidence that owning a pet is they found statistically significant evidence that owning a pet does actually make you feel connected. It turns out that the best pet to own is a dog. And you can think of reason why a dog is best to own. So it does a few things. First of all, you generally need to walk your dog. And if you talk to dog owners, what you find is they get together like at the dog park, and then that's an opportunity to socialize. And it's easy to socialize with pretty low risk. So you don't have to worry about, those distrusting feelings that come from loneliness. So dogs turn out to be the best, but other pets have also been found to be effective.
Well, as an avid fan of the cats in my home, I'm certainly happy about the kind of love that they bring to my life. And
Absolutely.
I know Rory agrees with that. Um, could you talk a little more about the relational aspects of loneliness. So one of the things that popped into my head as you were presenting is that for caregivers, and I'm thinking about private caregivers, people who will go and spend time in the home of someone who needs attention and help with bathing and cooking and whatever. So that's one of those jobs where you might be with someone who can communicate with you freely all day. You might be with someone who can't communicate with you at all. To what degree have you focused loneliness possibilities on also the experience of the caregivers with the people that you studied?
So we've focused mostly on older adults, although there are a lot of older adult caregivers, and there is a large body of evidence that shows caregiving is very isolating. And personally, as somebody who was a caregiver, last couple of years of my dad's life, he moved into our home. This is sort of what got me to start on this path, is trying to solve his loneliness problem that emerged after my mother passed away and he was living alone for the first time. And it's just true that you are forced to withdraw. And the more you are withdrawn, then it creates this cycle. And as I said, then these behaviors emerge that make it even more difficult. So it's one of the areas that we've thought a lot about. Because of the constraints financially, again, for a lot of these home care agencies, that they work on very tight margins, it's hard for them to introduce on their case, because even for the paid caregivers, and you have even family caregivers who are now paid through certain programs with the government, that it's just very isolating, but there's not a lot of resources there. And so we think that one of the things that needs to happen, because of all these bad health impacts that come from loneliness, that ultimately land up costing the government a lot of money and insurers a lot of money, because sicker people are expensive, that what we need to do is have some tests among those populations. So most of our tests have been primarily in senior living, non-for-profit senior living communities, and with social service providers that are providing various kinds of not-for-profits providing care to older adults. But we haven't yet been able to focus on the caregiver population. But we know that that's an area where there's just a tremendous amount of loneliness. By the way, I didn't mention it in my talk. About 35% of adults are lonely, and older adults in particular. The highest amount of loneliness is among young people, 18 to 24. And that's a different kind of thing. We have to learn how to be in relationship. And today, with a lot of the technology, some of that loneliness has gotten, it appears, larger and deeper. But about 20% is what we would call persistently lonely. Somewhere 15, 20%. There isn't great numbers because there haven't been great tools to measure degree of loneliness. So you've got about 15% to 20% of the adult population that is exhibiting those kinds of behavior to some extent. I think it explains a lot of things that are going on in the world today. It is just sort of that surly, distrusting, self-protective, self-centered behaviors that we see so commonly.
So I am, all of us in the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley are people who believe in the potential of technology to make a positive difference, right? Understanding the challenges that are out there as well. And I'm a big fan of the work of On the Call, Shag Shagrin, and the Playground Senior Circle, the work that they have done to bring a lot of people in, especially in remote areas, to connect with others. Can you talk about other things that represent positive interventions in terms of technological tools?
So there's a number. So first of all, let me say a couple things. Um, I don't expect people to be friends with their robots for the most part. I don't think that's really happening. Um, and we know from lots of evidence that people form stronger relationships with people they have more in common with. So bringing people together is an important thing around any kind of activity. It really doesn't matter the activity, it's the intentionality of how you do it. So we advise a lot of the communities and the people we work with that whatever programs you're running, whatever interventions, whatever technology you're using, you can infuse it with an intent to bring people together and provide those opportunities. Before I get to sort of the technological answer, I'll give you a quick example of this. So if you've ever watched Silver Sneakers, which is a good program for older adult exercise, and it's in gyms and YCYs and places like that. Very often what happens is people go into those communities, into those gym programs, they show up, they do their exercise, and they leave. Now, in early childhood education, if you look at very young children, like 2 years old, they exhibit something called parallel play. They play next to each other, but they never actually interact. That's what you see in a lot of these programs. So just by forgetting for a moment about the technological side, just by stopping in that program and saying, turn to your neighbor on your right, say hello, introduce, it seems corny. Those things really do have a big impact and make space for people to have those low risk conversations that begin to bring them together. So the challenge with a lot of the interventions that we've seen, in whether technological or not, is that they respond to the people who are already responding to the signal from their body to connect, right? So it's the 60 people who show up at the programming at the towers, they show up. The 200 don't. And so what we're looking is technology, like there's a company called Blooming Health, and they provide sort of text messaging and other kinds of technology along those lines, messaging technology. And that technology can be used to start to bring those people from the outside back into community. And we think those have an opportunity, properly done, to do things. Other programs that are low risk and bring people together are things like DeRote has something called, which is an organization in New York. There's an organization in Chicago called Mather, and there's an organization in California called Covia or Front Porch. And they have a virtual university without walls. So the systems call out to you, and if you sign up, and you're next thing you know, you're in a various kinds of programming that way. There's an organization here in New York called Enlivio. They have a national presence. They're part of something called Self-Help, which is a large not-for-profit. And they provide a virtual senior center experience so that you, for those, because there are lots of older adults who can't get out of their home, right? It's hard. They have mobility issues and things like that. They may be cognitively fine. They have a desire to socialize, but it can be difficult for them. And here's an opportunity to do that in an online experience. So I think those kinds of solutions work. The best ones seem to be the ones that really bring people together and give people the opportunity to interact in a safe way. And when I say safe, I'm not talking about scams and things like that. I'm talking about emotional safety. So if you are distrusting, and I know this seems, again, a little bit arty on the side, but if you are distrusting and you've got this self-centered, self-protected attitude, and you're worried that if you say something, it's going to be viewed as stupid, which is very common for lonely individuals, that they're viewing these people, remember, as predatory, then having someone there who's running the group, who makes sure everybody's heard, that makes sure nobody dominates the conversation, that nobody is abused in those conversations, is usually helpful. And those are the things that work most effectively in our experience.
Well, a lot of the things that you're talking about are part and parcel to good educator practice as well. As a person who does quite a bit of teaching, I'm appreciative of that. Let's finish the Q&A with a little bit about the overlap of the business model and the service, the value of the service to those that you benefit. So when I think of quality of life, it's very easy to kind of zero in on, is a person happy or not? But you talk quite a bit about the health effects of loneliness, the costs, the very real financial costs associated with those. And so that thing of having a good quality of life really becomes a good business practice as well. Is that the insight that led you to found your business? And can you tell us a little bit more about the clients that you work with? Just entities that essentially say, we need this.
Sure. So first, a couple of things. What brought me to it, as I said, was my father. At the beginning, I was really just looking for how I could help him. And I saw him change and I didn't really understand. And he became what I call a veritable roadmap of all the different things that happens to lonely individuals. Um, and so that's what originally brought me to it. And then the next step was, well, once we started to develop the social quotient, where do older adults live in sort of places that are concentrated so that you can bring a solution and test it at a large enough scale that it would be meaningful to the world. And so we eventually came across that there are a couple of different places where that works. And that's the areas we focused on. So senior living, especially not-for-profit senior living, where people are really concerned about quality of life and want to make the residents in the not-for-profit senior living communities better. Natural occurring retirement communities. These are areas where there's just a concentration of older adults. They exist across the country. The first one was in New York at a place called Penn South. It's a 15 building community that happens to have about half the people there are over the age of 60. And then we look at the veteran community, and a number of the team in our company are veterans, and there is, especially among the older veterans, the Vietnam era veterans, there's just a tremendous amount of loneliness. And while loneliness is not causal of suicidal ideation and depression and anxiety, it is highly, highly correlated. In fact, it's the most correlated thing that people will tell you, even though depression questionnaires and anxiety questionnaires never ask about loneliness. Loneliness is the number one issue that comes up among all those individuals. So we focused on those groups. Right now, what we're really doing is we're validating our technology with the academic institutions that we've been working with. And we think that's really the key. So I would consider what we're doing today, Russian, still in the beta testing, and we're looking for more, to lack of a better word, paid beta testing opportunities. And we have then communities that want to work with us, and the communities need support to do that so that we can fully test it. I think eventually where we'll probably live is in the diagnostic world, and we're set to get ready to both do some IP patent work and FDA Class 1 device work over the next year or so.
Well, tremendous possibilities in what you do. And I thank you for your work, not simply as someone who spent time presenting to us, but for the good that it's doing so many. Thank you. For all of you who are spending your time watching this recording or listening to the podcast, thank you for spending your time being a part of a community that values stories as a way of inspiring us to find new ways to make the world around us better. And we hope that you will spend time checking out the different things that we have. So you can find us at rotary.cool. That's our club. You can learn more about Rotary as an organization at rotary.org. You can find more from our YouTube channel, the hundreds of recordings that we have of fascinating people talking about different ways that they have worked to improve communities. You might also take a look at our podcast offerings. So the Digital Rotarian, a weekly offering of our programs, the Inspiring Solutions for a Better World, which is some of the best of what we've done over the last 10 years, and our new series, Development Success Stories, which is about improving communities that are challenged by poverty in different parts of the planet. So, as we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. Adam, what would you like people to have clearly in mind as they finish the podcast or video?
So what I'd like to leave people with is, as they think about the people that they encounter in life, that sometimes when they encounter that person who might be difficult or a little bit rough around the edges, so to say, that they consider that that person might not just be that way, but that they might be lonely. And underneath that persona might exist this wonderful, great person that if you take the time and the patience to sit with and to work your way through that discomfort and uncomfortable period, you might find some of the best people out there in the world. And I hope people go out and do that. So sort of uncover that power of connection.
I love that. Everyone, thanks for joining us. We will see you next week.
Thank you.